The largest stateless ethnic group in the Middle East, the Kurds, have a saying that sums up their struggle.
We have no friends but the mountains, because that's an epitome of the suffering and the betrayal that throughout history we have been facing.
Mountains have been a place of retreat, a place of go there, regroup, and fight back.
And they seem to do that vigorously. Just consider the alphabet soup of acronyms for the militias, parties, and governing bodies the Kurds have formed over the decades.
The PUK, the KRG,
the YPG and the YPJ,
The PKK.
the KDP.
and the SDF.
In our first episode, we introduced the Kurdish issue in light of a call by the leader of their largest militant group, the PKK, to disarm and disband. In part 2, we take you to 2 Kurdish statelets in Iraq and Syria, and we explore the decisive role the Kurds had in defeating the Islamic State group. I'm Krasi Ivanova-Twig, and this is the Global Jigsaw from BBC Monitoring, where we look at the world through the lens of its media, exploring the narratives, the propaganda and the disinformation.
Radio Tehran.
Мы не вторгались на территорию Украины.
Western countries are not the international community. That era has finished.
조중 두당 두 나라 최고 영도자 동지들께서는
Let's pick things up in Iraq in 1991. Last time we spoke about how Saddam's repression of the Kurds backfired when the US got involved in the first Gulf War.
No one should doubt our readiness to respond decisively to Iraq's failure to respect the no-fly zone. Moreover, the United States are prepared to consider additional steps should Saddam continue to violate this or other UN resolutions.
America's shield against Saddam's air force was a huge help for the Kurds. Our Iraq expert at BBC Monitoring is Mohammed Al-Jumaili.
I guess the story of Kurdish autonomy in Iraq really starts in 1991. The KDP and the PUK, they're long-running parties, well-organized. KDP is the oldest party, the Kurdistan Democratic Party. They were formed in the 1940s by Mustafa Barzani, who is the father of the current leader, Masoud Barzani. He's a domineering figure in Kurdish politics.
Masoud Mustafa Barzani, Swinbi Bayazdani Mazan.
He was the president of the Kurdistan region, but he stepped down. But he still pretty much runs things for the KDP. He is like the kind of godfather figure for the KDP, and he obviously is also a polarizing figure amongst Kurds.
Politics in Iraqi Kurdistan have been dominated by 2 parties with distinct bases and ideologies, and over time they became bitter rivals.
The PUK, they came about a bit later. So Jalal Talabani at the time, he was part of the KDP. He split from the KDP over ideological differences and formed his own party in the 70s, and that is the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, the PUK. They differ along so many different lines. The KDP, traditionally, they get their power base essentially from rural parts of Kurdistan. They have very strong links to tribal parts of Kurdish society, while the PUK was a lot more aligned to the urban class, more intellectual. Jalal Talabani himself, he's a leftist intellectual, and he appealed to that kind of class.
I'm very happy to see our Kurdish people determined to continue its struggle for the final goal. Right of self-determination for Kurdish people within the framework of an independent and democratic Iraq.
From the beginning of the no-fly zone, they straight away went into creating their own institutions. They're the only parties who actually have a military, essentially, the Peshmerga.
The emergence of this autonomous entity, the KRG, significantly bore the name Kurdistan, the Kurdistan Regional Government. But it came at a bloody cost.
They held elections soon after. It was not without its hiccups, to put it very understatedly. After the 92 elections, there was a bitter dispute between the KDP and the PUK. The vote was essentially split almost down the middle. That dispute culminated in the civil war in 1994.
So these are Kurds fighting Kurds. We talk about unity between Kurds across 4 different countries, and now we have in one country Kurds fighting Kurds. Tell me about this rivalry.
To this day, it's seen as like a very sore moment in Kurdish history. Many sources say that the KDP collaborated with Saddam to push out the PUK from Erbil, and that's how the KDP established its dominance in Erbil. That's often cited by supporters of PUK and kind of opponents of the KDP as they've stabbed us in the back for their own benefit and so on. So it was a very bitter civil war, and that ended in 1998 through a US-brokered peace deal.
What followed was a period of unity that paid off.
With 2003, with the US-led invasion, they agreed to join together to help the US in overthrowing Saddam and to present a united front in the face of a new Baghdad administration. And they benefited a lot from that, and in terms of concessions with the constitution, they came as the strong bloc, while Baghdad was split along sectarian lines.
And it resulted in a symbolic score for the Kurds in 2005, Iraq's presidency. It may be a largely ceremonial role, but it is now reserved for Kurds alone.
Jalal Talabani, he was also a huge figure for Kurds politically and very charismatic. He was able to kind of navigate relations inside Kurdistan and also with Baghdad, and he served as president of Iraq for a few years.
It's been the beginning of the rule of Iraqi people, and it means that all dictators who are committing crimes against their people will have the same fate.
Probably the height of Kurdish strength in the face of Baghdad in the early years of the post-Saddam Iraq.
The KRG didn't just produce the first Kurdish president for Iraq. It allowed for a new Kurdish media scene to thrive.
A huge amount of media outlets have popped up since the 90s after the establishment of the autonomous zone in the Kurdish regions. But these media outlets are very polarized. They're split along party lines. The main KDP affiliated outlets are Rudao, which is owned by Nashirwan Barzani, who's currently the president of the KRG. And also Kurdistan 24 is a KDP affiliated outlet again. And then for PUK, they have Gali Kurdistan and they have Kurdsat. And most recently, about a year ago, they established a new channel rising in popularity called Channel 8.
When the Kurds took control of Iraq's northern territories, that came with an added bonus, which became the lifeblood of the KRG. Oil.
There are oil fields close to Erbil that remain in Kurdish control and have been since the formation of the KRG in 2005. So they run those and they historically have benefited from that. In 2014, with the rise of ISIS, they were able to take a huge amount of disputed territory, so in Nainawa and Diyala, and most importantly in Kirkuk. And they began to export that oil independently, much to the anger of Baghdad. And that dispute has been ongoing to this day.
One turning point came in 2017 when Masoud Barzani called a referendum for Kurdish independence. And it backfired.
After the failed referendum, Baghdad reacted negatively to that. And as a result, the disputed territory, especially in Kirkuk, they pretty much lost all of that. Iraqi forces went in with the backing of Turkey and Iran. They took back control of large swathes of disputed territory. So that loss of Kirkuk also meant a significant blow to the amount of oil they control.
Baghdad has continued efforts to reassert itself, posing a threat to the KRG's hard-won autonomy.
The Iraqi government stopped budget payments to the KRG, and that really affected their economy. The Iraqi government would be the ones who pay public salaries directly, another lever of control for Baghdad. So these kind of problems endangering economic stability in Kurdistan for Baghdad. I think they're happy to have the KRG there to operate, but for them it's all about limiting their influence.
The government in Baghdad is not the only threat to the KRG. Another danger came from its very own mountains, and it forced a careful balancing act.
The PKK presence in Iraq stretches back to the 90s. In the north, a very rural part where the KRG and Iraq traditionally had very limited real control in the mountainous regions. They are very ideologically driven and battle-hardened as well. And the KRG and the KDP have avoided direct confrontation with them. They see them as rivals, and they kind of see them as a threat as well, because obviously it jeopardizes their relationship with Turkey.
Which reveals another division among the Kurds between the KRG and the PKK, because the KRG wants to be on better terms with the Turkish government, and the Turkish government is against the PKK.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Kurdish politics, of course, very complicated, a lot of moving parts. So the KRG, obviously dominated by the KDP, they are seen as very pragmatic. They don't have any problems with being more open to actors who may be enemies to them in order to establish their influence. So they are very, very keen to not have bad relations with Turkey.
You are listening to the Global Jigsaw from BBC Monitoring. Across the border in Syria, another Kurdish statelet was fledging its wings. Just like in Iraq, it seized an opportunity created by an upheaval elsewhere, the Arab Spring protests. Florence Dixon is from BBC Monitoring's Middle East team.
In 2011, the Syrian uprisings break out in the south. Assad's forces are spread very thinly across the country, so he decides to pull them out of the Kurdish majority areas in northern Syria to focus on the main cities. At that point, the Kurdish forces move in and take control of these areas, which is known as the Rojava Revolution, and this allowed for the creation of the various Kurdish-led, multi-ethnic political and military institutions.
Jiar Gol is a specialist on Kurdish affairs for BBC Persian and has regularly reported from the region. He is a Kurd himself.
Rojava, which in Kurdish means west of Kurdistan. Some estimate they are controlling 30% of the Syrian territory, and many of those cities and villages are bordering Turkey.
The challenges to Rojava came quickly, from a new kind of menace threatening the whole region.
It first comes under attack in about 2013 when Al-Qaeda advances against them, which includes the Al-Nusra Front, which later became Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, which is currently running the country. But these Kurdish majority military forces, the YPG and the YPJ, were able to defeat Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra.
As for the difference between the YPG and the YPJ Kurdish militias, the latter is an all-female fighting force. These Kurdish groups in Syria were not just militarily strong, but came equipped with an ideology, a manual of how to run a state, drafted by the PKK's leader Abdullah Öcalan, who is in a Turkish jail.
They have their autonomous region. They have been running their affairs. It's not 100% Kurds. There are cities, 40%, 50% of them are Arabs, or there are many Christian, many different factions, religion, nationality, or ethnicity. They live together. I think in a way they managed to involve everybody, particularly women. Every single post in the Syrian Kurdish controlled region is a co-chair, one man, one woman.
It seems the emphasis on equality is a guiding principle in running Rojava's affairs. It's diversity and inclusion, Kurdish style.
The autonomous administration for North and East Syria is based on a whole range of local councils. So all different regions are represented. There's an executive council, a legislative council, run as the different departments of the government. And it's essentially meant to be a kind of democratic model that lots of people have even suggested should be a blueprint for how wider Syria could be governed going forward.
They somehow managed to pass a very progressive laws in a place which really tribal code of honor is very strong. They banned polygamy. If a man gets second wife, could go to prison, could be fined. If somebody forces his or her daughter to marry someone, if the daughter disagrees, parents could be prosecuted. They have been trying to change the society as well, and it's very ideologically driven. They have managed that region fairly well with all the diversity.
Yet, as with any first draft, some aspects of the Rojava system have been met with disapproval.
There have been elements of this structure and of the way that they govern which have been questioned. Once it kind of spread, it has come under criticism by local Arab populations that they're not treated fairly. Even though it's multi-ethnic, the leadership are still very much Kurdish, and they have been various wrongdoings committed by security forces and by the military forces.
Kurds in neighbouring countries have been keeping a close eye too.
They're really watching what is happening there. I know many Kurds from Iran, for example, junior lawyer, went to that region to help to build that society. I come across civil engineer, I come across a judge even. He said, we are here teaching in universities.
As we've discussed, Öcalan's ideas have been especially impactful for one group in particular. He even coined a word for it, genealogy, or the science of women. But how do you sell female emancipation to a deeply conservative society?
The Kurdish are a traditional society, many of them pious Muslim. It will be a shame your daughter going with a bunch of strange men hanging out. But I think the idea of there is a celibacy, there is no sex, there is no relationship within them. Many family proud, they would say, my daughter is a guerrilla fighter in the mountain, in Turkey or in Syria. That's why I think one of the reasons PKK was successful, become a feminist organization. Many families weren't anymore worried about what neighbors talked about. Their daughter is among a bunch of men. God knows what's happening to them and what they do in the mountain. That's why I think one of the reasons many people, if you go talk to those families who lost their loved one, proudly they hang up the picture of their daughter. She was killed, she was fighting. She was one of the PKK guerrillas.
After the Kurds pushed out Al-Qaeda and the Nusra Front from their region, a new jihadist group rose to prominence. In 2014, it captured around 100 square kilometers of land in Iraq and Syria, where it declared a caliphate. It earned itself a fearsome reputation for its medieval savagery, and a Kurdish religious minority became one of its first targets.
In 2014, the Kurds were also taken by surprise with ISIS's rise and their rapid advancement through northern Iraq and Sinjar, which is the Yazidi majority area. The Kurdish government, the KRG, and specifically the KDP, they withdrew their forces, essentially abandoning the Yazidis and letting them fend for themselves.
The Yazidis, a non-Muslim minority among Kurds, were hit by a major IS offensive, while the KRG's formidable fighting force, the Peshmerga, were nowhere to be seen. What followed was one of the darkest episodes in the region's recent history, described by the UN as a genocide. Thousands of Yazidi men were killed. Thousands more women and children were taken as slaves. More than 2,000 remain missing to this day. Jiyar was on Mount Sinjar when masses of Yazidis were trapped while fleeing IS.
When we tried to land, we were overwhelmed by people trying to jump on board. On this flight, just about a dozen made it out. But the fear is, with airlifting on this scale, many might not survive. Jiyar Gol, BBC News, Sinjar Mountain.
When ISIS attacked, it was the PKK fighters who fought back. I went to the Mount Sinjar. There was just 13 PKK fighters there, but the ISIS didn't know that. Those fighters blocked that path and they fought ISIS, and many of them died to save maybe tens of thousands of Yazidis.
The Peshmerga rejoined the fight against IS later.
The Peshmerga were a lot more organized in the Iraqi army, and they were able to fend off ISIS, and they became the trusted ally for the West. So the US gave them a lot of military support. They coordinated extensively, but they were not the only forces. The Iraqi army contributed to that, and also, crucially, local Yazidi groups as well.
Meanwhile, 300 kilometers to the west of Sinjar in Syria, Rojava became a front line once again.
When ISIS attacked that region, they were pretty much taking over city after city with no resistance at all. And the ISIS flag was rising rapidly until they reached to Kobani.
IS drove Kurdish-led forces and civilians into Kobani, trapping thousands into a tiny area. Someone I spoke to who was there said they were reduced to one street in Kobani, up against the Turkish border.
The world was watching with bated breath. There were even live video feeds of the fighting via the cameras of global media outlets stationed at the Turkish border.
Allahu Akbar! From a strategic hilltop, Islamic State fighters with the...
Samedi 4 octobre, Kobané est une ville fantôme.
У сирийского приграничного города Кобани усиливаются боевые действия.
Possibly the entire world heard about Syrian Kurds when those young men and women in Kobani put off the fight. Pretty much they broke the myth of ISIS. Many believe defeating ISIS in Kobani, it was the beginning of the end of ISIS in that region.
This is when the US intervened. It provided air support to help these Kurdish-led forces push back against IS. They retook Kobani and they basically turned the tide of this conflict. I mean, it's a fascinating moment in history because you have the widest possible spectrum of international state and non-state forces on one side for a brief moment fighting against IS. The YPG and the YPJ, which were importantly Kurdish majority units with Arab elements in them. They formed the Syrian Democratic Forces, the SDF, and these are importantly Kurdish-led but multi-ethnic. And the SDF was then able to take territory from IS that was not only Kurdish majority areas in Syria, but Arab areas and areas with a whole range of ethnicities.
Kurdish women warriors hold a special place in the pantheon of heroes that defeated IS. One female fighter said this to the BBC.
When they see a woman with a gun, they're so afraid they begin to shake. They portray themselves as tough guys to the world, but one of our women is worth 100 of them.
The woman power that confronted the Caliphate's forces echoed a battle cry for a bigger cause.
When they fought ISIS, I heard that from the Kurdish fighters anytime going to the front lines, holding their hand in the victory sign and shouting, "Woman, life, freedom." And then it was replicated in Iranian Kurdistan. That's why Turkey is extremely anxious about an enclave, an entity right behind its border in Syria called Rojava.
Turkey looked on at the battle for Kobane with suspicion and refused to get involved. Dilay Yalcin from our Istanbul team brings us the Turkish perspective.
The West had allied with the Kurds against the Islamic State. And this was ruffling feathers in Ankara, because Ankara was afraid that any power that the Kurds had in the region, any declaration of autonomous area in northern Syria could trigger a revolt, a separation demand in Turkey. And Turkey's refusal to help the Kurds push back the Islamic State's advances at those times created major tensions in the Kurdish society in Turkey, because you have to understand that the Kurds in Turkey see themselves as related to the Kurds in Syria, in Iraq, in Iran. And this was perhaps the major breaking point between the Kurdish society and Erdogan's government.
While the Kurds were busy fending off the jihadist threat in Syria, Turkey launched some cross-border attacks against the SDF.
It was a huge concern for Turkey, who sees the SDF as an offshoot of the PKK. There were 3 Turkish incursions in 2016. In 2018, that saw Turkish and Turkey-backed forces move into Afrin and displace thousands of people. There were reported atrocities committed by these various groups.
2019 brought another major change to Ankara's satisfaction, as US forces partially withdrew.
Turkish and Turkey-backed forces swiftly came into this area between Tel Abyad and Ras Al Ain along the border, and they just pushed the Kurdish-led forces away, and it prevented the formation of an autonomous Kurdish entity that ran along the Turkey-Syria border.
Remember the slogan "Woman, Life, Freedom," which was used as a battle cry in the fight against IS? Time to cross the borders once again, this time into Iran with Sarbas Nazari from our Persian team. The year is 2022, and a young Kurdish woman, Jina Mahsa Amini, had just died in police custody.
Many would say she was killed, murdered, but the outcome was protests that sparked in her hometown Saqqaz, and it spread throughout all other Kurdish cities. It became an inspiration and turned into a nationwide unrest, leading to the killing of over 500 people in a matter of few months, not to mention thousands being sent behind bars and at least 10 protesters being sent to the gallows and executed. The thing about this movement is that many would define it as a Kurdish movement, because the main slogan, Jin Jiyan Azadi, or Women, Life, Freedom, is originally a slogan, in fact, a principle that was introduced by the Kurdish opposition groups, mainly the PKK in Turkey. The Kurds were proponents, the leaders of this movement in Iran, and the crackdown was quite bloody in Kurdish towns. In many cases, the cities would turn into war zones. Armored vehicles, sometimes tanks inside the cities, as if foreign enemy has occupied your country. The IRGC was responding like that with an iron fist, killing people on a daily basis. The youth and the teenagers were just out there shouting slogans against the Islamic Republic without any arms in their hands, without any guns. But the repression was absolutely unprecedented.
And do you feel the Kurds felt boosted by the fact that these protests became a nationwide protest, or was there a feeling that the Kurdish roots were undermined when the protests became big nationwide protests?
I would go for the first, probably. It in fact became a matter of pride for most of the Kurds. And this has been acknowledged by many other Iranians. At the same time, it became a means for many Iranians to try and understand the Kurdish struggle, which they had ignored for a long time. I would say the Jina Amini movement helped with the Kurdish identity and the value of the Kurdish struggle, which has been historical, and it became absolutely appreciated by the rest of the Iranian communities.
And how is the state media portraying these Kurdish protests?
روایتی که ضبط یک زاویه‌اش به عهده این موبایل ها بود. جوانان خریدن مداد آتش زدن بانکو. و زوایای دیگرش شکار دوربین‌های مداربسته شد.
We were not surprised to hear this old narrative put out by the Islamic Republic that these groups are linked to foreign adversaries, to Israel, to the United States. They are seeking to partition Iran and separate the Iranian Kurdistan to build an independent state.
We'll take another look at media narratives in the final part of this series. And after our trip back in time to understand the Kurdish quest for self-determination, it's time to focus on what happens next. How will Öcalan's call for the PKK to disarm and disband shake up this story and its many moving parts? This episode of The Global Jigsaw was produced by Barry Sadid, Krista Shaturi, and me, Krasi Ivanova-Twig. The sound mix is by Nigel Dix, and our editor is Judy King. Thank you for listening, and as always, share your thoughts and feedback. Our address is The Global Jigsaw, all one word, at bbc.co.uk.